So nice to be here. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. Appreciate that introduction. I went to UC Berkeley, and I didn't just go to UC Berkeley. I got one of those famous gender studies degrees. People still ask me, what are you going to do with that degree? And I'm like, what? I talk about gender all the time. So I make a lot of videos where I react to surgeries, such as the pictures that were shown just now. And I react to first-person narratives talking about their horrific post-surgical complications and comment on them and explain why they happened, the way they happened, why it was entirely predictable, and point out that the reason that they say that these have such low regret rates is because we're dealing with a population that is captured by a toxic social group, which many would call a cult, and who may have some sort of mental illness, which makes it impossible for them to emotionally admit that they really do regret it. It was a bad idea. And so you see people who are having these unfathomable nightmares, still saying, I don't regret a thing. It's fine. It's perfect. I don't regret it. We just went over some of the surgeries with Erin. I want to talk a little bit about puberty blockers and something that might not be intuitive, but which is true. So with puberty blockers, they're giving them a drug which acts on the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus to suppress the production of other hormones, such as luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, that then mature the gonads. And then the gonads, the ovaries and testicles, then produce the estrogen and the testosterone, which acts on the rest of the body. But those hormones that are traveling from the brain to the gonads, they're making pit stops on the way. They're doing other things in the body, and they're implicated in the maintenance of your neurology, your brain and your nerves, which means they're implicated in diseases such as Alzheimer's. This has already been confirmed by research. Puberty blockers are taking those hormones out of the equation, and they're not being replaced by cross-sex hormones. That's not part of the gender-affirming care at all. Because if it was, the gonads would mature, and the point of the puberty blockers is to prevent that. So I fear that they are really setting these kids up to have neurodegenerative diseases later in life, which is exactly what you see in disorders of sexual development that also naturally cause the lack of production of these hormones, such as Kalman syndrome. We see motor problems developing. So I liken it a lot to breeding animals for the cosmetic appearance. And if you know anything about animal breeding, you know that when you breed a dog for a cosmetic outcome, you can often create problems with the dog. I think French bulldogs are a common example where they have the very flat face, and they have so much skin on their face, and their face is so flat they can't breathe. So a lot of them, they'll have the problem where they can't even sleep because as soon as they fall asleep, they can't breathe. So we have something similar happening with children, where we are cosmetically modifying them to create the illusion that, we've just switched them over to the other puberty. But in fact, that's not happening. So much of the non-cosmetic but metabolically critical, maturationally critical hormone development is just not happening. And what's the result of this? Well, if you look at the famous case of Jazz Jennings, who's been in the news lately, Matt Walsh has commented on his case, Breitbart, etc. Ever since he was in the first season of this show that's been running for 8 seasons now, he has not had normal sexual development that you would expect from a child that age, despite the fact that he was put on estrogen in order to grow breasts and to otherwise go through a female puberty. He didn't have crushes on other people the way that you would at that age, and they talk about it extensively. Later in the show, in some very disturbing scenes where he's just at a park with his 80-whatever-year-old grandmother, talking about how he's never had any sort of sexual feelings his whole life. He's never had an orgasm. They show a video of him and his parents and the doctors, of Dr. Marcy Bowers, who did his surgery at 17 and a half. They removed his genitalia and they inverted the skin. There was not enough tissue because of the puberty blockers to do it. And as a result, well, what happened? When you stretch something too far, it rips. And that's what happened. So they had a whole episode that I reacted to in an episode that I called the Blood Blister Burst episode, which is exactly as horrific as it sounds. And they did multiple follow-ups. I believe that they had a 4th surgery planned when COVID hit to try to salvage that area. they have to forcibly pry it open, spending an hour or two a day prying it open with an instrument, or else it will just scar shut and shrink shut. And then, you think, okay, well, at least they don't have to worry about it anymore. No, because you have now this pocket of scarred, winding skin that cannot be fleshed out, that is not designed to be a warm, moist pocket where it is. And it's just a fertile breeding ground for bacteria, which then can go right up the urethra and cause bladder infections, kidney infections, and of course sepsis. And so I reacted to some people who had that done and who actually ended up getting sepsis after I reacted to them, and then posted one of them in particular, Ruby Fiera, was found cold-brain and lifeless and barely survived the sepsis, and who knows what sort of damage was done. Because when you have sepsis, you have a drop in your blood pressure, you get cold and gray for a reason, and that drop in pressure can cause brain damage, and that can cause accumulative damage. So even if you don't die right then, you might die 2 years later because your brain can no longer sleep, for instance. So it's just, I get worked up talking about this because the implications are legion, and the financial cost of it was also mentioned. One person that I responded to in several videos and followed her case, she was transitioned as a minor also, paid for her double mastectomy out of pocket because she was under 18, so this life-saving mastectomy was not covered by insurance because of her age, which doesn't make any sense. Was put on testosterone, I believe, at 13, and then has just she ended up getting a phalloplasty and had multiple complications, an episode of sepsis, almost lost her leg, and she posts her medical bills too. And she was closing in on $1 million just for the phalloplasty complications, of which I believe she said that she paid about $5,000, and the rest of it is coming from tax dollars because it's set up so that if you don't pay for the phalloplasty as Medicaid or Medicare and things like that, it's treated the same way as if you don't pay for any medical care for a black person. That's how legally it's set up. So it's considered to be discrimination otherwise. But I apologize, I didn't see what that sign was. That 5 seconds or 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay. Always wear your glasses. So it's the implication of these hormones are endless. So I've talked a lot about puberty blockers already. The hormones themselves, there's always a big debate about how much and whether to give, for instance, estrogen to women after menopause, because it is recognized to cause heart problems and to cause other issues, but the lack of estrogen is also recognized to cause issues. Well, they're at the end of their lifespan, nearly. I mean, not completely there, but they're much closer than when we're talking about a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old who's going to be on these cross-sex hormones for life. The thing about men and women is that biologically we are different, and we are not just different because of the effects of these hormones, because of course we produce different hormones because we were already different. We are different genetically, and we have been a sexed species since long before we were humans, which means everything else in our bodies has evolved to assume that the sex difference is already going to be there, and therefore the hormones and the genetics that contribute to the sex difference are already going to be there. It's all in tandem. An example would be that the pancreas, for instance, which is often thought of as not being dimorphic, not being different between men and women. A woman's pancreas functions worse with testosterone, and a man's pancreas functions worse without testosterone. So if a woman has PCOS, for instance, polycystic ovary syndrome, and produces excess testosterone, she's more likely to develop diabetes because of the impact on the pancreas. And that's throughout the body. We're fundamentally different. So one of the lies of gender-affirming medicine is that when you give a girl testosterone, sure, it's changing her risk of this and that, but it's just switching her over to the male risk profile. So yeah, it will shorten her lifespan, but it'll shorten it the same way as it would shorten a man's. And setting aside that that's several years of life, that's a big deal. It's not true. A woman who takes testosterone has 4 times the risk of a heart attack as a woman that doesn't take these cosmetic doses of testosterone, which are very high enough to change the body profoundly, and twice the risk of a man. And the reason for that is that we are proportionally, our bodies are different throughout our bodies. That includes our arteries. So when you thicken the wall of an artery, such as from taking anabolic steroids that causes muscle to grow, there's muscles in your arteries. That's how they can adjust their pressure. That narrows the space. When you take testosterone, that increases the number of red blood cells you have in that already proportionally smaller space. And when you take testosterone, it's also going to change the connective tissue throughout the body, which is how their voice changes. It's changing the connective tissue. I'm a speech pathologist, as was mentioned. It is changing the connective tissue in the voice profoundly, and as detransitioners, or detransitioners specifically know, people who've taken testosterone know, it doesn't bounce back after it's been changed. And those same tissue types are in other places of the body. You can't hear them, but they're changing too, right alongside the voice. So I've gone on for hundreds of hours on my channel talking about these complications, these implications that I feel like it's sometimes that I've only even scratched the surface of them. If you're interested in seeing my hot takes on them, I can hand out my information later.
Channel?
So on YouTube, I'm XILEX space AISLE. That only has some of my videos because I get censored pretty heavily. So you can also find the rest of my videos at Exulansic.com, which is EXULANSIC.com. And so I go by the screen name TT Exulansic. I'm also on Twitter. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.